In this video, I will be talking about the tubular cast-on. The tubular cast-on produces a seamless roll cast-on edge for ribbing. Usually this is used for 1x1 ribbing. There are methods to use it for 2x2 ribbing, but I tend to not use those. It doesn't look to me as nice as with 1x1 ribbing. The key with a tubular cast-on is that there is a tube. I can insert a smaller DPN through this cast-on edge because there is a pocket, a tube at the cast-on edge. There are several methods to produce this cast-on edge. In this video, I will be showing you 3 different methods. The first method uses waste yarn, and you use whatever cast-on method you would like to use with this waste yarn. I am going to use the long tail method. And you cast on half the number of stitches that you need for your ribbing. I'm going to cast on 10 and for a 20 stitch ribbing. You then cut your waste yarn and you join your working yarn and begin with a purl row with your working yarn. And you will work 4 rows of stockinette stitch with your working yarn. So I'm purling 1 row, I will knit 1 row, purl 1 row, knit 1 more row. I will do that and come back in a minute. So I have worked 4 rows, beginning with a purl row. So I'm ready to work another purl row, but now I am going to be joining these stitches. Now let me add, use a contrasting color waste yarn so that you can easily see these stitches when we go to pick them up, and make sure it is a smooth yarn so that you can easily remove it later. So to work this, first we will purl the first stitch. Then we need to bring the first stitch. So you're finding that purl bump in your working yarn color and grabbing it and placing it on your left hand needle and then knitting it. Then I'm going to purl the next stitch, move my yarn to the back so that I can knit, and then find the next stitch right here from above, top to bottom, place it on the right hand needle and knit. On the left hand needle and knit. Now purl the next stitch, find the next, place it on the left hand needle, and so on across the row of your stitches. Don't grab the waste yarn, grab just the working yarn. There is one more right there. Knit, purl. Then carefully remove depending on which cast on method you use, this can be easier than other methods. So obviously the long tail cast on is a bit more cumbersome. So that gives you your tubular edge, and you are all set to begin working a knit one, purl one ribbing across. So that is method number 1. And with this method, you can use the same size knitting needles as the regular ribbing, because you are simply working in stockinette and then rolling that edge to bring the stitches up. This next method uses waste yarn and a crochet hook. You make a slip knot and place it on your crochet hook. And we are going to be making a chained cast on over our left hand needle. So the crochet hook with its slip knot comes over top of the knitting needle, the working yarn behind. You bring the working yarn around and pull the crochet hook, and then move the working yarn behind again. You will chain half the number of stitches needed. So again, I will do 10. This last stitch, don't place it on the needle. Cut your waste yarn and pull through that last loop to make for an easy to remove waste yarn. So this would be an excellent cast on to use for that first method instead of the long tail cast on. So now you can set aside the crochet hook and get your knitting needle and your working yarn. This method works best for an odd number of stitches. So what we are going to do is knit 1 stitch with our working yarn, yarn over, and knit the next stitch. Our yarn overs will become our purl stitches. And the reason this works best for an odd number of stitches is because it is difficult to add a yarn over at the end of a row to make an even number of stitches for this method. Now we'll turn the work, and we are going to begin making our tube. So in the first method, we made our tube by working 4 rows of stockinette stitch and then rolling that up, and that created our tube. Well, with this method and the next method I will show you, this tube is created by working essentially double knitting, a series of rows of double knitting. So the way that you do that, so I'm trying to see. So really these are my purl stitches where the pink yarn is bumping up. And the yarn, what were the yarn overs, are now my knit stitches. So to work double knitting, you will work every knit stitch and then slip every purl stitch with the yarn held in front. So this first stitch is presenting to me as a purl, so the yarn is already in front. I will slip it with the yarn in front. And now I move the yarn to the back and I will knit this stitch. Now I move the yarn to the front and slip. Then I move the yarn to the back and I knit. So only the knit stitches are being worked. The purl stitches are being slipped. This forces all of the knit stitches to the front towards you and all of the purl stitches to the back away from you. You are working double knitting. So all of the purl stitches are acting as the far side fabric stitches. It's going to end with essentially a purl, so I will slip that. Now I will turn the work. I've worked one row of double knitting. For these cast-ons, you need to make sure you work an even number of rows in double knitting so that you have the same number of rows on each side. So that was row number 1. This will be row number 2. So my first one was a knit. Now I slip, knit, bring the yarn forward, slip, bring the yarn back, knit, bring the yarn forward, slip. And so on. I will finish this row and work 2 more rows so you can see how that will look. Okay, I've finished 4 complete rows of my double knitting, and this is what it looks like. So now I can remove the waste yarn. It should just unzip like so and pull right out. And there is our tube, and now you can begin working your knit 1, well, this is a purl to start, so purl 1, knit 1, ribbing across the row to begin your ribbing, and there is your tube. The third method is the Italian tubular method, and it uses no waste yarn. You will start with a slip knot and a long tail. So you need a tail about 4 times as long, just to be on the safe side, as your cast on. You probably don't need 4 times as long, but if you're casting on a lot of stitches, you do not want to run out of your tail. So the tail is coming towards me and the working yarn is going away from me. I have the slip knot on my right hand needle. I place the yarn in the slingshot position. This is very similar to what you do for long tail cast on. This is not the long tail cast on. The movements are different. All right, we are going to start by picking up a stitch from the index finger. To pick up the index finger stitch, you go towards yourself and under the thumb strand and up in between and catch the index finger strand, and then go under everything, and then you will pivot. Then you will get a stitch from your thumb strand. To get the thumb strand, you have to pivot the needle away from you, come under everything, and in front of the thumb strand, dive down in between and pivot out and back. And make sure these strands, you have tension on these strands so that everything, all these knots, sit to the bottom of the needle. This cast on is an invisible cast on. And it works best if it doesn't work great on a cable needle because these stitches tend to roll around a lot. It works best on a straight needle. So I've gotten one from my index, one from my thumb. Now I need one from my index again. I go in front of the thumb strand underneath, come up, catch the index strand, and come forward. Then I need one for my thumb. I pivot away, under everything, catch the thumb from the front, dive down, and go back. These strands always get caught from in front of them. So the index finger strand from closest to you to away from you, the thumb from closest to you to away from you. That way they are not seated incorrectly on the knitting needle. The right hand leg needs to be to the right, in front and to the right. So I've gotten the thumb. Now I need to get the index finger and then the thumb. And with this method, you will cast on all the stitches that you need. So I will be casting on 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Now I make sure all the bumps are to the bottom of the needle, and I pinch these strands and I turn the work. So by pinching those strands, and now I'm holding the tail to the left. That tail has anchored this last stitch so that the stitch can't come undone. And if you look, so that looks like a knit stitch and this looks like a purl stitch. So now we will begin to work our double knitting again. So this stitch is looking like a purl, so I will just slip it with the yarn in front, and then I will move the working yarn to the back, and I will knit this next stitch. Then I will slip the yarn, move the yarn to the front, slip this stitch, move the yarn to the back, knit this stitch. And this will be row 1 of our 4 double knitting rows. I will finish this row and work 3 more rows of double knitting and come back. I have worked 4 rows of double knitting, and now I can begin working my 1x1 ribbing, and it's beginning with a purl. Like so. So that is the third method for casting on a tubular cast on. Now, all of the methods that use the double knitting for the first few rows, keep in mind that double knitting tends to work up larger because you're slipping every other stitch, larger than your regular knitting. So as a result, you may want to go down a needle size or two for the cast on and the tubular knitting rows, and then switch to your regular working needles for the ribbing when you begin the ribbing. Don't go too tightly. You do want this edge to stretch. Another thing is that you wouldn't have to use 4 rows of the double knitting. So this is 4 rows of double knitting in worsted weight yarn, and it might be a little too bulky possibly. So you could do 2 rows of double knitting rows and then begin your ribbing. You'll just have to experiment and see which one you like the best. But keep in mind the key is that a tubular knitted cast on should have a pocket for a needle to slip into. That's what creates the tube. So those are 3 methods of working a tubular cast on. Thanks for watching.